Well, hello, welcome back to this live conference. So we hope you had a chance to take a break, to relax and stretch. So don't worry, Gemma's still with us. However, we decided we should give Gemma a break from moderating. So I'll be doing the job. Apologies, I know I'm not as good as Gemma, but let's stay on track for today's agenda. So if you attended yesterday's session, we learned from Omotola and Thomas that we all have something to say. We all have stories to tell. So this is what we're going to use Gemma's skills for. Gemma is a professional, and she's always had a passion for interviewing. And you know her by now. You've seen her skills into interviewing, into telling stories, helping us shape this agenda for the day. So telling stories and engaging with audiences, big and small, is her passion. And this passion led her to work as a producer for many years in the realms of sports television before taking the leap into presenting. That's why she's doing such a great job today. And she's worked on a variety of different events and projects. Gemma's biggest strength is her ability to tease out stories in a way that will inspire audiences and create an environment that encourages interviewees to share their most powerful and insightful experiences. You have the superpower to tell your stories. So Gemma, I'm giving you the floor to tell us more about how we should tell our stories. Welcome back, Gemma.
Thank you, Audrey, for that lovely introduction. And it's nice to switch places, although a little bit strange to be switching places. But here we are. So yes, I am going to be helping you all to tell your stories of change. And some people might feel confident already with public speaking or just telling their stories. And some people might feel absolutely terrified at the thought of it. So hopefully I'm going to help you build up that confidence and feel like you can go out there and share your unique experiences. So I know that many of you watching today have overcome some pretty tough challenges in your lives and continue to take on what the world has to throw at you. And it's these stories of resilience that the world really does need right now, more than ever. And yeah, in this session, I really do hope to give you the confidence to be able to share it with the world, because it is a gift. And I personally would love to hear some of your stories, and it would be a crying shame if they weren't shared simply because you weren't sure how to go about it. So, telling your story of change. Now, just to give you a brief introduction, I know you saw me yesterday, or if you joined today, then you've seen me for most of the morning. But just to tell you a little bit more about myself. So my career has been all about seeking out storylines, as Audrey said, and telling stories through, first of all, television production. So I worked as a producer for the first part of my career, and encouraging others to share their stories and experiences through interviews. And through doing that, I've seen firsthand how those stories have united people, inspired people, and importantly, provided a window into other people's worlds. And I will be discussing that in this session. And then latterly, I went on to become a presenter and an event host, and got to do more of the same, really, interview lots of incredible people, but also find ways that they can connect with their audiences through interviews and through allowing them to tell their stories. So these are some of the discussion points that we will be addressing today, just to give you a little overview. So we'll be asking 4 main questions, and I'll be answering them. Why do we tell stories will be the first question. What makes a powerful story? How do we encourage others to tell their story? And that's where I'll give you a little bit of an insight from my side. So trying to tease things out. I know we have people out there who actually want to get into interviewing or encourage other people. So that'll be a segment for you. And then importantly, why does the world need to hear your story? And I said in the beginning, you know, that the world does need to hear it, and I will be revealing why. Okay, so why do we tell stories, first of all? It's always good to start with a why. Well, the truth is that we tell stories for all sorts of different reasons, and stories are how we make sense of the world and of each other. And it can inform us, we can take lessons from stories, they can entertain us, we can get escapism through other people's stories, and they can unite us as well as we share all of our experiences and commonalities. And it's a way, as I say, to relate to one another. But for the purposes of today, I'm going to be talking specifically about real stories, stories of real personal experiences. And real life stories can be incredibly powerful simply by virtue of the fact that they are exactly that, they're real. And just to give a candid example, you know, when you watch a film and before it starts, a little caption comes up and says, this is based on true events, or this is a real life story. And it sort of makes you sit up and you sort of think, okay, you kind of, you view the film in a different way. It gives you a different perspective because you think, okay, this can happen, this has happened, this is achievable. So the stories that you'll be sharing, they're real. So people will sit up and have that outlook when they receive the story that you have to tell. And the real goal in the end is to make people feel something. That's what we ultimately want to do. And this reaction can be shaped into a positive one or a negative one, depending on the sort of story that you want to tell. So is it a cautionary tale? Is it an against the odds story that inspires action? Or is it a once-in-a-lifetime story that provides escapism and stirs up a zest for life and an awe in your audience? So what do you want to make your audience feel? That's the big question. Now, as an example of the power of storytelling and, you know, trying to achieve a goal through those stories, I'm going to give you a little scenario. So I was asked to host an interview with world and Olympic champion track cyclist Victoria Pendleton. And the event was a business conference, and the audience was filled with entrepreneurs and business people, marketing professionals, and people that wanted to feel inspired and motivated and encouraged in their work life. So when I was preparing for this and doing my research, I was thinking, how can I make the absolute most of this opportunity to talk with an Olympian who's won 2 gold medals? You know, obviously we'll want to talk about that and that experience, but I want to find something that everyone can relate to. Of course, we will touch on how that felt because we want to provide the escapism and the entertainment side of it. But it's important to find some common themes, something that people can hang their hat on and relate to as she discusses her journey. So I wanted to make her stories relatable, even to a room of business-minded people who may never have even sat on a bike before. So I wanted her to share stories about overcoming challenges, working towards goals, and figuring out who you are. And the stories that she told, they were inspiring, and yes, they were motivational, and shortly we'll look at the components that make a powerful story. But to highlight the point, the storytelling for a room of businessmen and women who, you know, they want to relate to a journey of an Olympic gold medalist and find inspiration in the experience that she shared. How do we go about doing that? Well, I'm going to give you a summary, first of all, of the why before we get into the details. So to make an audience feel something, we need to create a reaction in that audience. We need them to buy into the story that we're telling. To package our experience in a way that allows our audience to feel something. So that goes back to give them something to relate to, give them something where they can put themselves in the frame. No matter who we are or what we've experienced, we can connect and create meaning through our audiences. To share our personal experiences with others, so to provide a window into our world, and to communicate ideas, beliefs, and emotions in a meaningful context. So I said we'd get into the details. What makes a powerful story? Well, as I've said, for a story to really hit home and to resonate with an audience, there needs to be a form of connection between the subject of the story and the listener, viewer, or reader. The connection could be something specific, like a relatable scenario, a shared emotion, a familiar setting, or mutual beliefs. But oftentimes it's the simple fact that we're all sharing in the broad human experience that can be enough of a connection to engage with an audience. The key, though, is to allow the audience in and establish that connection early on in the story. Once there is that connection or relatable hook for the audience to invest in, the journey that you take them on has extra gravitas and meaning. Now, in the context of Life Amplified, we're not talking about fictional stories, but as I say, your real life experiences. So the shared human experience box is already ticked. Now it's a case of allowing that experience to shine through and maybe even get a little bit vulnerable when you're telling it. And that can feel daunting, but it needn't, and I will tell you why. Now, I'm not here to tell you how to write a novel or to get into narrative structures, but it is useful to look at the main components of a good story structure. So first of all, set the scene. Establish the context of the story, who you are, when it was, where you were, the setting, some form of context just to set things off. Then, of course, there's the challenge, the hurdle, the difficulty. It can be something tangible, or it could be something abstract, physical, or emotional. And once you've told us about that challenge, of course, now that we're invested, we want to know, how did you overcome that challenge? Now, I've put in here unexpected and surprising elements, and they're not essential, but they are a great tool and a great way to keep the audience engaged and add another little element that makes people remember your story. So an unexpected element, a twist in the tale. Then the conclusion, a sense of closure or a solid endpoint to the story. Not necessarily narratively, because I know a lot of these stories will be ongoing and will be still, you're still writing your story, but in a way that you tell the story. So give it that sense of closure, whether it's the tone of your voice or a thought that you want to end with, something that signifies that the story's come to an end. And then at the end, always give a takeaway. And I don't mean the edible kind of takeaway. I mean something that the audience will have in a succinct sentence or two, maybe a paragraph that they can take away with them and remember or pass on to other people, just summed up in a nice, succinct manner so that it's easy to remember and easy to share. And then 3 other good tips to keep in mind when telling your story. Ways to make the audience feel that I've mentioned before. Now, getting vulnerable. It takes courage to be vulnerable, but it's also where the magic happens, because deep down, we all have insecurities, challenges, hang-ups, difficult experiences. And of course, it's up to you how vulnerable you wish to be and how much of those challenges and difficulties that you wish to share. But sharing them really does open that door. It creates that connection between yourself and the audience, and it does help them to buy into your story. So even just a hint of opening up to those challenges, it can be really effective. Be relatable, allow your human side to come through, and it goes both ways. So we've talked a lot about how to relate to the audience, but also it's so helpful for you to find a connection with your audience. It helps with your confidence. If you're stood on stage and you're feeling a little bit worried about all the people that are looking back at you, for example, just remember they're people too. They're humans. They've got their own challenges and hang-ups. And just remember that shared humanity that you both have. It really will help you to tell your story. And then finally, why am I telling my story? So once again, think about your audience. Think about the why. And you don't have to get hung up on this point too much, but it's just a useful reference point, really. It's a good reminder that, why are you sharing that story? What aspects of that story do you want to share specifically? And what is it that you want to make your audience feel? Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to use the same example that I referenced earlier, now that you're familiar with the situation. So Victoria, she was ready to be open and, yes, at times vulnerable with the stories that she told. And she spoke of her experience breaking into the professional track cycling world and the problems that she faced, not just competitively, but emotionally and mentally too. Feelings of not fitting in and not fitting stereotypes and the discomfort that that caused her. So she set the scene, first of all, going from a hobby cyclist into a professional cyclist, and then making her break into that world and the challenges that she faced. Then she went on to discuss how she overcame those challenges, how she decided to create her own identity within the professional cycling world, and how to utilize her own unique traits to use them to her advantage. So that's her overcoming, the conclusion to beating and overcoming the challenge that she faced. Then we went on to discuss the next part of the story, which is about not just joining the world of professional cyclists, but feeling that acceptance and empowerment. And these feelings are universal, wanting to feel accepted, wanting to feel that empowerment. These are things that people can relate to. And it does go straight back to what I was saying before, that a room of businessmen and women can hang their hat on those sorts of situations, wanting to fit in, wanting to feel confident. And how do they how do they get around that? They find what's unique to them and they try and make it their own. So Victoria did stick to those storytelling strategies, and she also found a way to connect with her audience. Now, how do we encourage others to tell their story? So this section is about sharing some tips from my perspective as an interviewer and teasing out stories and helping people to feel comfortable enough to share theirs. Now, I've got some pictures here on this slide from a few interviews that I've carried out, and I've included the photo on the right-hand side for a reason. So this was my very first day working on a big sailing competition as the event host and presenter. The event was the America's Cup World Series, and this photo was taken on the main stage in the middle of New York City with several thousand members of the general public watching. And it's important to mention that it was a few members of the general public watching because, as you'll find out, a lot of them didn't know that much about sailing. So a few hours before I went on stage, I was briefed by the communications manager. And I was told that many of the people in the crowd would not be sailing experts, may not understand the rules of racing, or even know too much about the sailors themselves. But we need to find a way to get them engaged in the competition and give them a reason to get behind one of the teams before racing starts. So my job was to bring the teams up on stage ahead of racing and interview them for a bit of a chat and utilize this as an opportunity to engage the crowd. Now, these sailors are literally about to go out onto the water and do some serious competition. So they've got their game faces on, and it's really not the ideal time to ask them to get vulnerable. But I had heard that the week before, the skipper of the Swedish sailing team, Nathan Outeridge, who is the person that I'm interviewing there in that picture, he'd recently proposed the week before to his wife. And I thought to myself, well, his now wife, obviously then fiance, I thought to myself, this is the perfect opportunity. This is the perfect in to try and get that human side across. So I decided to set the question up. So the team were on stage and I said to Nathan, well, Nathan, it's the start of huge competition. There are a lot of questions being asked of the Swedish team. And I also understand that you asked a very important question of your own last week. And I saw the change in his facial expression as he suddenly realized that I was referring to his proposal. And his vulnerable side did instantly come through as he recalled that moment. And I asked him to, talk us through the proposal. How did it go? Was he a romantic man? And the audience were oohing and ahhing, and they really bought into the story and they really got to know him as a person. And it was a way to connect with him, connect with the team, and have a bit of a story, to think about, not just now and to engage, with the team, but when they're out on the water and all you can see are the boats, a bit about the people in them. So that was one of the stories there. And a great example of how you can create a connection and just finding your way. So just a nice little example to flag up there, really. So how do we encourage others to tell our stories? I've got a few bullet points. Now, this is something to think about when someone's coming to you and they might be in this vulnerable situation. They've got something that they want to share. And it's your job, if you are going to be doing the interviewing or teasing out that story, to get the very best out of them and give them the best chance to tell their story, how they want to tell it. So, helping them feel relaxed. Usually when there's cameras involved or any sort of public speaking, there's often a fair amount of nerves too. So it's really helpful if you can put your interviewee at ease. And it can just be simple things like smiling, being friendly, making sure that they have water if they need, and just feel comfortable. And, when they're in position, they feel ready and happy and ready to take on the world. Is that what it may feel like to them? And next, give something of yourself in exchange. This is something that I found to be really important, actually, because when you're asking somebody to sit there in front of you, in front of a camera, in front of a massive crowd of people and tell their story, you're asking them to be incredibly vulnerable. And usually this should be a sort of exchange, and it helps if you give up something of yourself in return. And it can be something small, and you can do this before the cameras are rolling, before you're actually on stage. Just something small like, a joke that you've heard recently, or what your journey was like, to get to the venue, or just a little something of yourself. It just helps them feel that it's not all on them and that there is a shared humanity between you both. Be confident. It is important as the interviewee to feel secure and that you're in a safe pair of hands to share and to help that person tell their story. You need them to feel confident in you. So by exuding confidence, you really will help them to just sit back, relax, and go for it. And I don't mean being loud and being the center of attention or being an extrovert. I just mean portraying an air of confidence that they can trust. So things like making eye contact, open body language, remind yourself mentally of the why are they telling their story, so that you can be sensitive to them in your line of questioning. Next up, listen. Really listen to their answers. Now, you may be able to ask extra questions based on the line of questioning, based on what they're telling you. And listening may sound silly because you think, well, if you're in a conversation, of course you're going to listen. But there really is a difference. And you can notice with some interviewees when they sit, listen to the story, listen to what's been said, and then ask something related to it, or if they're just rattling through a list of questions that they've planned. And at times it can also feel a little bit like an interrogation, which leads me on to my next point, which is think of it as a conversation. It helps everybody relax. It helps the flow in a much nicer way. And also it just is more engaging if it's a conversation all round. You can just tell when there's that vibe. Next, guide with your questions. So I referenced earlier the narrative structure that we have, and it's good to try and adhere to. So with your line of questioning, you can encourage people to stick to that line. So if you know there's something surprising about the person you're interviewing and they haven't mentioned it, maybe just throw in a little question to encourage them to talk about it. If you want to give that important, powerful takeaway, so a sentence or a paragraph at the end of the story, you can just ask them at the end, what would you like people to take away from your talk? What's the one thing you'd like people to remember? So you can use your questioning to prompt people when they're telling their stories. And then the last point is such an important one just in life, really, but definitely in interviewing. Prepare. Do your preparation, do your research. It will actually help with all of the above points. It will help with your confidence because you know who you're talking to. It will help with the way that you ask the questions because you'll know the backstory, you'll know where they're coming from. So preparation really is key. So those are some tips there. But why does the world need to hear your story? And as I said at the beginning, everyone has a story to tell, and not just any story, a powerful, meaningful story that has the capacity to lift spirits, inspire action, and allow others a window into your world. But why you, and why your story in particular? Well, in sales and marketing, there is an abbreviation, and you may have heard of it, USP, which stands for unique selling point. And that's often bandied about a lot. Why should people buy this item? Why is it different to all the others? How will we make it stand out and make people think that's what I want? Well, you can use a similar abbreviation to discover why your story needs to be told. And that's this time using USP to stand for unique sphere of influence and perspective. The stories that we tell can have a ripple effect, affecting those within our immediate circles, so our families, friends, and colleagues. But those ripples can then spread as your story gets retold or the people that you've inspired take action, and it can affect other people in a positive way. I'd also argue that the influence you can have on your immediate circles are unique in and of themselves. These people will be receptive to you and your story and your message in a way that nobody else can achieve. So utilize this exclusive access. Who knows how far away your ripples will be felt? So that's a really important thing to remember. And not only is your sphere of influence unique to you, so is your experience, and specifically your perspective of that experience. Only you can tell your story in your way, and only you can reach your sphere of influence in your way, and only you have experienced your journey in your way. So no matter who else has gone through something similar, your story is unique. And it's also worth mentioning that there may be little things that you've experienced that you might think, but who can relate to that, or who would benefit from me telling this story? But the truth is, you never know who's going to benefit. Something small that you've done or you've experienced, or a bit of advice that you think helps you in your everyday life, might absolutely help someone get through something really tough. So never doubt the power and effect that you can have on others with your stories. So in summary, why do we tell stories? To make our audiences feel something, to connect with one another, and to better understand the world that we live in, to share information, beliefs, ideas, and provide windows into other worlds. What makes a powerful story? Build a connection with the audience. Find something relatable that can give your story impact and meaning, whatever the context. And if possible, be brave and be vulnerable. And I know that sounds like a little bit of an oxymoron, but you do need bravery to be vulnerable. So be brave and be vulnerable. How do we encourage others to tell their stories? Create an environment in which they trust us with their story. Make it an exchange, make it a conversation. Be confident and inspire confidence. And of course, preparation, do your research. And finally, why does the world need to hear your story? Because each and every one of you has a USP, so why not utilize it and allow those ripples that you create impact positively on someone else's life? And believe me, they will. So in conclusion, tell your story, impact lives, change the world. Don't be afraid to tell your story, because you can impact other people's lives. And ultimately, when those ripples spread far enough, you can change the world. So go out there, everybody, and tell your stories. And that is the end of my presentation. So if anybody has any questions, I will be more than happy to answer them. Audrey, back to you.
Well, thank you, Gemma. This was an amazing session. I think we are in an environment today where it is about telling your story, and Mark will be joining us right after to actually explain how we can actually use those social media to tell our stories. Now, I do have a very specific question. I'm not the most confident person in the world, and I come from a background where I've been told that I don't really have the best writing skills ever. So, as a beginner, you've given me all that information, but where do I start?
With telling your story and writing your story?
Yeah.
I think the first thing, and it's kind of
how do I start?
How do you start? I think initially it's a kind of emotional, mental thing, actually. It's owning your story, and it's a mindset. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a mindset, because you've got to feel ownership. You've got to feel that this is your story. It's your right to tell it. And what I would do to start with is I would write down the main things you want to get across from your story. Just do it in bullet points, the main things, so that you can always refer back to them, because I know from writing in the past, you kind of drift off on tangents and things, and it's easy to sort of get lost. So come back to your main bullet points. What do you want to get across to your audience? What do you want to make them feel? And are there any interesting twists or turns, things that you can add in there? And why are you telling your story? What value do you want it to have? What value do you want to add to the world? And I know you said, there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of conversations with social media. It's easy to be bombarded with things. So it is helpful to have that checklist of what are the main bullet points of things you want to get across. And that's probably where I'd start. And then you can structure it from there and decide how you want to tell your story and where. And obviously you'll be thinking about who to tell it to as well.
So I got we got a question from the chat, and I think, I had the same question. And I think you briefly talked to it, but so maybe we can expand on that. So what if I don't think that my personal story is interesting compared to other stories? You talked to that USP, but how can I be convinced that my story is as interesting as someone else's story?
Yeah, because your story is, and as I've said, it's a unique perspective. So it's going to be new to other people. Just in the details, in the things that you've experienced, there will be elements of your story that are new, that are interesting, that are a window into you and your world. But then there's also going to be things that are relatable, which will be reaffirming to people. There's different reasons why we listen to stories. So if you're listening to someone's story and you think, oh, wow, that was amazing, my story's never going to be as amazing as that. Maybe your story's about reassuring people, or maybe your story's about, telling people something's okay. It's okay to feel this way or that way. Maybe your story's about escapism and it's completely different to somebody else's story, but that doesn't mean it's no less important. So I think just remember that people tell stories and receive stories for different reasons, and just find the why would you want to tell your story, and what message is there in that story. Just kind of pick it apart a little bit and you will find something. Absolutely.
So my next question, kind of like relates to people I've met in the past, and Some people are advanced in that journey compared to me, where, I'm more at the beginning of that journey. And so some people, are dreaming to make it to, attend a TED Talk. So what advice do you have for those people who are, whose aim is actually to participate in a TED Talk?
Sure. So TED Talks, they're all about adding value, right? So they want you to share a message with the world. That's what it's all about. And they want to know that the message you want to share is important, has some resonance, is worth listening to, So the first thing I would do is think about, what is the message that you want to tell? What is that important message you want to share with the world? Then when you're actually going to submit or apply to a TED Talk, make sure that that is really clear and succinct, and that hits them straight away, the message that you want to share. With pitches and whether it's ideas or television programs, I used to work as a developer pitching TV ideas. And the shorter and more succinct you can get your idea in that initial pitch, the better. So in some ways, you want to sort of cut away some of the fluff and stick to the main bits that are going to really hit you and resonate with you. So, with the TED Talk, it's who you are, refer back to your USP, what makes you unique, and what is your experience, what is your influence, and what is your message. Make those things really clear in that application, so that they know exactly what they're getting and that it stands out. Make it stand out. Oh, and another thing, final thing. If you can create a buzz around your story ahead of, trying to apply for a TED Talk. So create some kind of, maybe a following or some sort of buzz around it, just to get things going, then that would really help as well. That's always good, to get a bit of commotion going around your idea or your story.
And like moving a bit, I mean, it's a question that kind of correlates to, TED Talk. Some people, have been telling me on former programs, I'm not good at public speaking. What do I do? Because I don't want to go in front of, my peer support group and speak in public. How do I get better? I'm just not good at it.
Yeah. I definitely feel like I can answer this question, because, that feeling when you step on stage and there's lots of people looking at you, the first thing I'll refer back to what I said in the presentation was that, remember that everybody's human, and that is so true. And you just need to keep that in your mind, that everybody has hang-ups, has challenges. A lot of people in that audience wouldn't be able to stand up and tell their story. So keep that in your mind. But also, I want to go back to that thing of ownership. So before you've even stepped on that stage, I want you to feel like, let's say you're speaking at an event, right? I want you to act like it's your event. I want you to feel like you helped put it together, even if you didn't, even if you got an email saying, I want you to come talk at this event, can you do that? Yep, that's fine. It's now your event. You're part of the event. So I want you to come at it with the mindset that you invited all these people that were in the audience. You arranged all of the people that were, doing the stage show, sorting out the microphones. You did all of it. And now you're just stepping onto the stage and you're welcoming everyone as if you were welcoming them into your house, for example. And you're welcoming them in. And I just think that changes the outlook. If you just think, I'm part of this, this is my thing, it just changes the way you feel about it. And I've had that, when I have been invited to events and it's really busy and you've got the production team and they're trying to sort everyone out, working out the run of show and things like that. And you feel a bit alienated, which doesn't help with nerves, because you just think, okay, well, I'm the one that's about to go out there on stage and, I just kind of want to feel reassured. But what is reassuring is if you just think, no, I'm actually part of the team and I'm part of this whole thing. I'm not just someone that gets, plonked on the stage to tell their story and then it's on to the next person. You're absolutely part of all the magic that's happening. And I don't know if that helps, but it certainly helps me when I have to go out on stage in front of everybody. So.
Well, that's a good piece of advice. So, and I think that, I want to transition to, what we heard today about, there are, what we heard about yesterday and today also, with different organizations like the Michael J. Fox Foundation. They're all putting out, resources and tips, and today also Gemma reinforced the fact that, they have platforms and forums to help people share their stories. And so how do you feel about, because I talked about earlier about getting started. And so, and also, as part of the program, we feel, and that's interesting because you also touched upon that in your presentation. We want, how do you inspire people to tell their stories? And that's also something that we want to continue doing with, the Medtronic Foundation and Life Amplified, as giving people the tools and the resources to help them, get started. So how, what do you think about those organizations that are putting out, tools and forums and, resources for people to get started?
I think it's absolutely fantastic, because sometimes you need that. You might have, your story in mind, what you want to do, but you have no idea how to go about it. And that can be so daunting and overwhelming, especially if it's a new world and a new industry, being out there in the public sphere. So I think it's brilliant to have a helping hand through that process. Absolutely. And while I've got the opportunity, actually, I just want to go back to something that was said at the beginning, where, trying to find your purpose and, your passion. And I had an example where one of my passions is sharks and wildlife and marine conservation, but my work is really nothing to do with it in a way. I mean, I have worked on a wildlife documentary once, but I'm very removed. I'm not a marine biologist. I'm not an aquarist. I live in a city, so I'm not right by the sea. And I had a sort of weird feeling of almost like imposter syndrome when I wanted to try and reach out to that community and try and embed myself in it, because I thought, who am I? Just to give you background, I wanted to start up a YouTube channel where I interviewed amazing shark people, basically, sharky people. And I just thought, who am I to sort of wade into that world where there's incredible people with PhDs, or, they've been diving with great white sharks without a cage and they've been doing it their whole lives. How can I make my way into that world? I do feel like an imposter. And actually, the truth is that by being slightly outside of that circle, I've actually added more value, because I've brought in my circle, my sphere of influence into that world, who would never have really thought about sharks. And now they know all about them. They're interested in them. They want to go diving with them. They want to protect them. And so I've actually brought two worlds together, which initially wouldn't have crossed paths. And so if you ever worry about the whole imposter syndrome thing and thinking, oh, I don't belong, that's actually your strength. That's actually unique, and you need to maximize and utilize that. And it will help you on your journey of spreading your story and spreading your message.
Great. So maybe let's move to the last part, to the last part of the session. We talked about the fact that everyone has a story to tell. Yesterday, we put emphasis on that. Today, you said it as well. There are different people who want to hear your stories. So maybe that's a good segue. And you also emphasize on the fact that, there are people who want to listen to this. And then I'm just reading another question that we received through the chat. We know that, there are so many future support group leaders. So how do you actually, get, those people might have butterflies, and we actually talked about the butterflies, the imposter syndrome, but how do you actually get those people to be calm and get out there? We are offering, a platform for people to share their stories on live and livelifeamplified.org. The Michael J. Fox Foundation is. You're actually saying it in your own words. How do you actually get people to get out there? What else can you actually bring to this conversation? And what advice and last advice do you have for those people who want to do it, who have butterflies, and who have the willingness but don't know, are not sure that they want to go out there and don't know how to start?
Absolutely. What I would say is, there are so many helping hands being offered to you. And I've learned that throughout these 2 days. And what I would say is absolutely utilize those helping hands and utilize that support, because having that support behind you will eventually help with getting more confidence, help you with the tools of how to share your story. But crucially, give you that first step, which is normally what we need, that catalyst to actually go on this journey. And that is my advice, is that absolutely use the resources, absolutely get in contact with these foundations that have these expertise and want to take you along with them, because the first step is actually reaching out and acknowledging, I want to tell my story. I don't know how, I don't know, and although I say this isn't true, I don't know if my story, is worth telling. It will be. Just reach out and use these resources, and then your journey will begin, and it will just go from there. I think the first stage is just to accept that support being offered.